Let the boss worry about him.
You're calling from your phone again.
Perhaps something a little more, yes. Let the boss worry about him.
You're calling from your phone again.
Now, if you go back a couple of years.
Kissinger is even a less likely basketball player than he was a sex symbol. But the 650,000 miles and 57 countries visited during his tenure as Secretary of State do qualify him as a globetrotter. So Meadowlark Lemon and Company made him the first honorary globetrotter in the 50-year history of the team.
The numeral that's on the back of this jersey accords exactly with my estimate of myself. And I feel a certain affinity with your style of play because I too like to make up the rules as I go along.
Kissinger also said that he had been called for traveling and would be out of the game for a while.
Roy the other day received, Roy Howard, a telegram, as I remember it, from the chief of the Japanese Press Association, in which said the damnedest thing that ever happened. I wouldn't refer to it because it only stir up bad feeling in this country. And this country is ready to pull the trigger if the Japs do anything. I mean, we won't stand their nonsense. Public opinion won't in this country from the Japs if they do some fool thing. Well, this Mitsunaga fellow wires to Roy and says, there will be no war with the United States, I'm quoting from memory, on one condition. and one condition only, and that is that the United States will recognize the new era in not the Far East, but the East, meaning the whole of the East. Furthermore, that this recognition, there must be evidence of it. And the only evidence of this recognition the United States can give is to demilitarize all of its naval and air and army places in Wake, Midway, and Pearl Harbor. Of course, that's the first time that any damn Jap has told us to get out of Hawaii. The Germans and the Japs have gone along, the Italians for, what, 5-6 years, without them upslipping, without them misjudging foreign opinion. They played a damn smart game. And the time may be coming when the Germans and Japs will do some fool thing. That's what I think. Now, the best chance we get made to do something foolish. I never thought, and it never occurred to me. Pearl Harbor.
Wow. Roosevelt was a real piece of shit. That was the sentiment of my own great-grandfather, who said that Roosevelt was not to be trusted. He was a would-be socialist dictator who sold the U.S. out to the Soviets at Yalta. Good evening, everybody. You know what day it is. It's the first day of Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah, everybody. It's also December 7th, a day which will live in infamy. That's the saying, right? But was it a tragic, unforeseen event? Or was it the result of a buildup that was long coming in a backdoor policy for Roosevelt to get into the war? I think you know the answer to that because you're watching Moose Heaven. Hey everybody, welcome to Moose Heaven. If you enjoy this content, let me direct you over to buymeacoffee.com/mooseheaven. Over there, you can give me money. You don't have to, but you can. Giving me money helps support this stream. It helps bring more of this content. Let me tell you, these things take a lot of effort. I thought, you know what? It's the holiday season. And Pearl Harbor Day is something of a secular conspiracy holiday because lest we celebrate the bankster holidays, I feel like we should remember things like Pearl Harbor Day. Remember, Pearl Harbor has a different meaning to us conspiracy people. I think we celebrate it as some kind of a holiday almost to remember and to recognize psyops and tyranny. So that's what we're gonna do tonight. I thought in the spirit of the holidays and Pearl Harbor Day, it's gonna be a little holiday thing. We're gonna have a fireside chat of sorts. Welcome everybody. Pour yourself a drink. Let's, before we begin, have a State of the Moose address. Those coffees that you send over, they do help. Let me tell you, these things are not easy to produce. I want to do more of these streams. However, a lot of work goes into this. I cannot underemphasize that point. So your donations do help. I am not just grifting you. Furthermore, I have several projects in the works already that are in the pipeline. The last stream that I did on JD Tippett and how it relates to the JFK assassination was very well received. I got a lot of positive feedback on that. You guys seem to like the JFK stuff, so I have a ton of more JFK stuff, let me tell you. It's a rabbit hole, and if you're already into that sort of thing, if you've already heard all of the Grassy Knoll Magic Bullet stuff, then well, have I got something new for you? Because there's aspects of that whole thing that nobody talks about, and if you're gonna say, hey, Spirit, it was 60 years ago, everything's been released. Yes, you're right. Everything has been released. The government's not holding back any secret stuff. Well, they are. But the stuff that they've released, you can look through it. You can find, you can draw little Pepe Sylvia things. You can figure out stuff, but you gotta know where to look. We're gonna look, and we got stuff to talk about, and we got names to name that nobody talks about. Oh my God. Bum, bum, bum. Oh my God, that's my favorite clip, and you're gonna find out why. So, if you want to see more JFK stuff, that's coming up. I got that coming up next. Don't you worry, we're gonna do a Lee Harvey Oswald Christmas Carol. Furthermore, I have a big project that's gonna take a lot more work. It's gonna take a lot more time. When people talk about Israel, they tend to start in 1947, 1948. And they tend to frame it around the Israeli-Arab conflict. But I want to produce something. I want to tell a story that isn't told very often and isn't told in English very often, which means I'm probably going to have to get some clips translated, which requires funding. Probably going to have to buy actual footage and do it the legit way, that sort of thing. So, before Israel becomes a state, they have to fight for their independence. And there's a lot of infighting. So, if you want to hear the story of how far-right Jews, Zionist Jews, collaborate with Nazi Germany to fight the Allies, well, then I've got a story for you. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So, if you want to contribute to that project, buymeacoffee.com/mooseheaven. But without further ado, let's get on with why we all came here. How did this traitorous son of a bitch sell out this country? How did we get to where we are now? And let me tell you, again, Pearl Harbor Day for conspiracy theorists. It's like our Christmas. So we're gonna tell the nativity story. We're gonna tell the nativity story so that we recognize the parallels. And I want you, as we tell this story, I want you to pick up on all of the parallels that are happening right now. How similar all of this is. right? Get out your bingo cards. How did we get? Because there was a time when we weren't like this as a country. How did we get like this? How did we get from point A to point B? This is one of those points in between. And so we're gonna explore. We're gonna tell the nativity story of Pearl Harbor, and to do that, we've got to start with the attack on Pearl Harbor. No, not that attack. The other one. The day that doesn't live in infamy. February 7th, 1932. That's when this guy, Admiral Harry Yarnell, is part of a war game operation, a simulated attack from a militaristic Asian island nation. I have no idea who they could be referring to. And so, Rear Admiral Harry Yarnell is part of the attacking forces in a war game meant to test the vulnerability of Pearl Harbor. He is in command of the USS Lexington, which stations itself off the coast of San Diego in California and conducts a war game operation on Pearl Harbor. Now, everybody expected Yarnell to attack with his naval fleet. However, he doesn't. He launches an airstrike where in the war game operation, they simulate bombs by dropping bags of flour onto the base. So in the end of the operation, Yarnell is declared the winner. However, he's criticized for his inappropriate choice of the day of attack. You see, he chose to attack on a Sunday. You can't attack on a Sunday. But what it really showed was the vulnerability of Pearl Harbor to air attacks. Almost a decade before the day which will live in infamy. Now, observing these tests in Hawaii and reading about it in the press are Japanese diplomats. Oh boy. I'll let you draw your own conclusions there, but understand that the story of Pearl Harbor starts way before Pearl Harbor. In fact, let's go back to 1936. That son of a bitch Franklin Roosevelt that we talked about earlier has just won he's the first and only person to be inaugurated into his third term as president. Gee, I can't see why my great-granddad thought that he was a would-be dictator. It's 1936. We won't even get into the New Deal. That's on a whole other stream. But understand this message. We have to get this message clear that Roosevelt is elected into his third term primarily because of his stance of not wanting to enter into the conflict in Europe. At this point, 80% of the country is isolationist. They don't know nothing about no European nonsense, and they don't want to get involved. And so in 1936, Roosevelt is elected into his third term as president on this message.
From New York comes President Roosevelt's declaration on foreign policy, which he made not as a political candidate, but as a spokesman for the American people.
I've always thought that peace, like charity, begins at home. And that's why we have begun at home, here in North and South and Central America. But peace in the Western world is not all we seek. I have seen war. I have seen war on land and sea. I have seen blood running from the wounded. I have seen children starving. I have seen the agony of mothers and wives. I hate war. We are strong, but less powerful nations know that they need not fear our strength. We seek no conquest, we stand for peace.
So he's elected on a platform of, oh, we stand for peace. I've seen war. I hate war. This son of a bitch, son of a banker, has never fucking seen war. But nevertheless, he's elected to his third term. But let's divert for a moment. Let's get really geopolitical with it. Let's talk about Japan. You see, in the 1930s, Japan has imperial aspirations. It wants to become an empire, the likes of the United States or Great Britain. It's building up its naval forces, it's building up its army, it's building up its industry. However, in case you didn't know already, Japan is an island. I know. Fascinating. And because it's an island, it needs resources. So, to collect the resources in which to reach out as an empire, it has to, you know, grab territory. And so it does so. The Imperial Japanese Army invades Manchuria, which is occupied by China at the time. Now, important note, China. Let's talk about China. China, what? First of all, let's get this out of the way. What do we always say about China?
Don't trust China. China is asshole.
That's right. Don't trust China. But during this time, China is not doing so hot. It's having its own civil war between it's the Chinese Republic and the communists. So there's already instability in China. Japan seizes upon this and invades Manchuria, seizing a bunch of territory, right? And it's kind of awesome, and nobody really talks about the second Sino-Japanese War, but we're going to.
Shanghai has fallen to Japan. Before the final terrific onslaught of Japan's mechanized army, China is forced to withdraw beyond the Suchao Creek, and Japan's army commander controls all the native sections of the world's sixth largest city. These pictures show the final street-to-street and hand-to-hand battle, the house-to-house advance behind a smoke screen, with tanks snorting ahead through the narrow streets. The wounded carried away under a withering hail of machine gun bullets, bombs falling from the air like raindrops in an April shower. Watch close and you can actually see the bombs twisting down. With British and French troops watching but not allowed to interfere, these 45 square miles become the world's storm center, where one stray bullet, one misdirected bomb might bring death to a British subject. Even after Japan has occupied the city, there remains the mopping up of the isolated snipers, hidden on every roof, behind every top floor window, meeting death with an oriental smile as China's richest city falls.
That's racist. Orientals don't smile? That's just a stereotype. So these Death Corps of Krieg looking motherfuckers right here are actually the Japanese Special Naval Landing Forces. In 1937, Japan reaches out and takes Shanghai. Oh no. It's crazy how long the US has been protecting Chinese interests. I'm not really gonna get into the European front too much in this presentation. I think that there's enough information out there for you to learn about that. Maybe one day I'll cover Uncle H and all of that. But I think you already have the general idea that Britain is being bombed by Germany. They're getting their asses handed to them. They are running low on resources. China's being overrun by the Death Corps of Krieg. All the while, this smug-looking motherfucker, Roosevelt, is claiming, we're gonna stay out of the war. But, he has ulterior motives, as we'll find out.
As the president speaks momentous words on the radio.
This nation will remain a neutral nation. But I cannot ask that every American remain neutral in thought as well. Even a neutral has a right to take account of facts. Even a neutral cannot be asked to close his mind or to close his conscience. I have said not once but many times that I have seen war and that I hate war. I say that again and again. I hope the United States will keep out of this war. I believe that it will. And I give you assurance and reassurance that every effort of your government will be directed toward that end. As long as it remains within my power to prevent, there will be no blackout of peace in the United States.
But it turned out he was lying. For you see, maybe there weren't boots on the ground. Maybe Roosevelt wasn't sending troops over to Europe or the Pacific. But was he furnishing them with weapons? Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. For you see, U.S. ships were already protecting British ships from German U-boats. And they were running guns over to Britain, and they were supplying them with ammunition. You know, because we must support our allies against the fascist cause. So how was Roosevelt able to get the U.S. into war? without getting the US into war? Well, by running guns mostly to Britain, and the policy was they passed a series of what were called neutrality acts. Now that sounds real nice, right? Now I'm sure that you viewers of Moose Heaven already know that in the post 9/11 era, there's all sorts of double speak to our policies. And they call these the neutrality acts. That sounds really awesome, right? Almost like the Patriot Act. Patriot, awesome. How could you go wrong? Well, the neutrality was that, hey, we won't send over troops. We will stay neutral. But we'll totally supply you with guns and ammunition and stuff. You just gotta come pick it up yourself. And we'll totally warn you about German U-boats to protect, your ships so that they can cross the Atlantic just fine and dandy. So, when you hear about in grade school about how Pearl Harbor, and that's how the U.S. entered the war, was it, or were we already in the war? I ask you.
President Roosevelt himself repeated that pledge when he addressed the 77th Congress in Washington.
We shall send you in ever-increasing numbers, ships, planes, tanks, guns. That is our purpose and our pledge. In fulfillment of this purpose, we will not be intimidated by the threats of dictators that they will regard as a breach of international law or as an act of war. Our aid to the democracies which dare to resist their aggression. Such aid is not an act of war, even if a dictator should unilaterally proclaim it so to be.
Is this all sounding wildly familiar to you? Because it should be. Hey, we're not in the war, but we're totally giving guns and ammunition to those people. Is all of this like striking? Is this ringing a bell? Are you seeing parallels? So while the British are coming over, picking up their guns and ammunition, meanwhile, the brave Chinese are getting their fucking asses handed to them by the barbarous Japanese.
As China's tragic struggle drags into its third year, we present these dramatic pictures from the Chinese side of an actual battle far into the wild and mountainous interior. China's army is ill-manned, ill-trained, and ill-equipped, but still it struggles on. Japan's latest invasion of China, which has already lasted 2 years, is war on a huge scale. Even today, the number of men engaged is more than twice that of the war in Spain. At its furthest limits, Japan's invasion extends 1,000 miles from north to south, 1,000 miles from east to west. But still far from subdued are tens of thousands of square miles, even behind the Japanese lines. Regions ruled by guerrilla bands of Chinese, while Japan is forced to keep more than 500,000 men under arms. In filming these amazing pictures, the cameraman took almost as much risk as the soldiers, moving forward in 2s and 3s on the deadly job known in warfare as contact with the enemy.
Contact with the enemy.
Such is the indomitable spirit of the Chinese people.
Oh, those brave Chinese people. Am I right? Oh, the brave Chinese. The brave Chinese. Fighting the onslaught of a ruthless dictator named Japan. And so, look, let's get one thing straight. Your average American in the 1930s, 40s doesn't know shit about shit. They don't know anything about what's going on in Europe, let alone fucking China. Nor do they care. They just know they want to stay out of it, right? So, how do we move all of those people into a fucking war? Because let's not get things twisted. War is big business. I'm sure you know that. You're watching Moose Heaven. After World War I, you get all kinds of fucking, I don't know what to call it. It's like a complex of industrial, like military something or other, where the people who make the bullets and the guns and the tanks and the rubber for the boots that the soldiers wear, everybody's making a shit ton of money. And post World War I, they're going, hey, we could be making a shit ton more money. I think you understand how that operates, right? I don't need to explain that to you. I don't need to explain how running guns and manufacturing wars is big business. But how do we do this under the noses of the American public? Well, how do we aid these brave these brave Chinese soldiers who are resisting the onslaught of the Japanese invasion? How do we help them? Well, if we wanted to help them without getting involved, we could sell them. Hear me out. We could sell them P-40 Warhawk planes. We could paint them in Chinese filigree. We could paint them like Chinese planes. But we can't trust these chinkies, son of a bitches, to fucking fly these American-built planes. No. We'll get American mercenaries to do it. Yeah, we'll get American mercenaries to fly these planes, and no one will be the wiser. A fascinating little footnote in World War II history. The Flying Tigers, everybody. How the U.S. was able to get into the Second Sino-Japanese war without actually getting in. They hired mercenaries to fly planes for the Chinese. It's a fascinating story, and we're gonna watch a little thing with Barbara Walters. And I am gonna take a bathroom break. You guys enjoy this.
It's a Pearl Harbor anniversary story you probably won't see anywhere else. The intriguing possibility that in launching a sneak attack, Japan did to us what we might well have done to them. Tonight you'll hear the details of a secret plan approved at the highest levels of the U.S. government.
With the approach of the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, America has been getting a refresher course on the attack. We're reminded that in the fall of 1941, relations between the U.S. and Japan had steadily deteriorated. But untold is that the United States itself was plotting a secret effort against the Japanese. And now, as Stone Phillips shows us, the old story has a new chapter.
It was Sunday afternoon in New York, and many Americans were cozied up to the radio, listening to an exciting football game.
He's up to the 25, and now he's hit and hit hard about the 27-yard line. Bruiser Kennard made the tackle. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
It was news that stunned the nation.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Now, when most Americans think of Pearl Harbor, they remember how badly the U.S. was blindsided by Japan's naked and unprovoked aggression. How we were literally caught dead in the water, virtual sitting ducks. But what most Americans don't know, and what President Roosevelt never disclosed, is that America had its own secret plan to bomb Japan first. This plan, signed and approved by FDR himself on July 23, 1941, nearly 5 months before Pearl Harbor.
I certainly didn't know that there were plans for strategic bombing of Japan before Pearl Harbor.
Are historians generally familiar or aware of this?
I don't think so. I've read, I've looked in some of the standard histories of this period, and I have not found any reference to this at all. So I think this is new.
This eye-opening document was actually declassified around 1970, but incredibly, it remained buried here at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. for decades. The plans are laid out in black and white, the planes that were to be used, their targets, and it proves that the official story of America's entry into World War II was by no means the whole story, and that from someone who was there. No one knew about the bombing plans.
That was secret. All the supplies were secret. I mean, what we were sending was not a matter of public knowledge.
Our story begins with a romantic chapter out of military lore, well known to the American public. It is the story of the Flying Tigers and their famous shark-toothed P-40s. Also known as the American Volunteer Group, or AVG, they were a small group of daring U.S. flyers, led by this fighter ace named Claire Chennault. They were known as mercenaries, hired by China before Pearl Harbor to help fight off the brutal Japanese invaders.
Look, Captain Jim, looky, wham, wham!
Termites. They made a fucking movie with John Wayne about this shit, guys.
Flying Tiger Charlie Mott.
The Japanese were the bad guys, no question about it.
And your mission was to take them on?
Yes, yes.
Their primary objective was to protect China's only lifeline, this winding supply route known as the Burma Road.
Certainly, order of priority was one, seize control of the air over China. Keep China in the war.
Skip Adair's job was to find the volunteer pilots. When you were recruiting men for the American Volunteer Group that summer, 1941, what was the strategic goal of the operation?
We were to kill as many damn Japanese as we could.
Based. Fucking based. You know what that deserves?
Don't trust China. China is asshole.
Deserves one of those. Fucking based.
That's simple.
But in reality, the pilots Adair recruited were not mercenaries at all. While they flew under the Chinese flag, their operation was planned and paid for by the U.S. government. The U.S. government knew about this, helped develop this plan.
Not only they knew about it, but they were 100% behind it. Where do you think the $50 million came from? The United States. It was secret. Nobody was supposed to talk about it. We did a damn good job of keeping it secret.
And the need for secrecy wasn't just for military reasons. Sending not just equipment, but soldiers to China would have been a violation of U.S. neutrality laws. Flying Tiger Ed Rector.
It was against the U.S. law to fight for under another flag for another country.
But what most Americans will be startled to hear, and what is the subject of this report, is that the United States, long before Pearl Harbor, had secret plans for a second American volunteer group with a much more daring mission. Flying Tiger Dick Rossi.
There was a second group, which would be a bomber group, and the third group would be another fighter group.
So it was all in the works.
Yes,
at least that was what you were being told.
Yes.
We knew that there's going to be a bomber group formed. In fact, Chennault told me that I would probably get the bomber group.
A secret bomber group flying against Japan before Pearl Harbor? Sounds inconceivable. But Claire Chennault, the leader of the Flying Tigers, laid out his offensive strategy for Japan early on. Quote, "If the men and equipment were of good quality, such a force could cripple the Japanese war effort. A small number of long-range bombers carrying incendiary bombs could quickly reduce Japan's paper and matchwood cities to heaps of smoking ashes." Now, those were Chennault's words. The question is whether his plan was backed up by the White House. That's the crucial question we wanted someone to answer.
But after half a century, we thought that might be impossible. Well, surprisingly, there is one key figure from FDR's White House who is still around to answer our questions.
His name is Lachlan Curry. In 1941, he was one of the president's closest advisors, Roosevelt's personal envoy to China, and Claire Chennault's biggest supporter in the White House. Today, Curry lives in South America. He is 89 years old, and his voice is frail. But he did agree to help us understand those dramatic days preceding Pearl Harbor.
Claire Chennault wanted to bomb Japan, didn't he?
Yes, very much so.
You were an enthusiastic supporter of Chennault's plan.
Oh, yes. And I helped in every way I could, yes.
To push the plan through, to see that it was executed.
The whole project, yes.
This was the secret plan, as presented to President Roosevelt, called JB 355, JB standing for Joint Board, which is the equivalent of today's Joint Chiefs of Staff. Discreetly labeled aircraft requirements of the Chinese government, it lists among the strategical objectives destruction of Japanese factories in order to cripple production of munitions and essential articles for maintenance of economic structure in Japan. The distances from Chinese air bases to target cities in Japan are clearly mapped out. Nagasaki, 730 miles from Chuchao. Osaka, 1,060 miles from Manchao. Tokyo, 1,780 miles from Hangzhou. Was it workable? Were planes available that could do the job? An entry written by renowned General Hap Arnold says, the Lockheed Hudsons have ample range to perform missions against targets in Japan. Advanced bases are available in eastern China. It is 1,300 miles from these advanced bases to industrial Japan. The plan was signed off by the Secretary of War, the Secretary of the Navy, and approved by FDR. The date, July 23, 1941, almost 5 months before Pearl Harbor. When we showed Joint Board Plan 355 to Lachlan Curry after 50 years, he said some parts seemed familiar while other parts didn't.
And that's where it ends. Sorry. Sorry for the abrupt ending. That's just where the clip ends. But you get the idea. You get the idea. This right here, this has been a long time coming. This is not a new thing. America cocking itself for China is not a new thing. It's not a new phenomena. It didn't start with Joe Biden. So when your liberal social democrat friends, if you have any left, tell you, actually, FDR was like the best president, you show them this. You tell them about this, because they don't know about this. It's just fascinating to me, like how long the U.S. has had it made its alliances very early on. It knew which side it was going to pick. Let's talk academic for a minute. Let's just put aside any kind of like subjective viewpoints for a moment, and just historically speaking, communism and fascism are kind of like brand new concepts, like that are still being argued around this time. They're very European, first of all, and like it's very seen as like, hey, that's like fucking that's European. It's commie gobbledygook. It's very fringe, right? And FDR brings that like social democrat, hard left, viewpoint, and then after that, that's America. We don't go back from that. There's no undoing that after FDR. Early on, right? Before, quote unquote, America's in the war, before Pearl Harbor, this son of a bitch, he's already made up his mind about what side he's going with. He's going with socialism.
Never before, since Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, has our American civilization been in such danger as now. Frankly and definitely, there is danger ahead. Danger against which we must prepare. But we well know that we cannot escape danger or the fear of it by crawling into bed and pulling the covers over our heads. If Great Britain goes down, the Axis powers will control the continents of Europe and Asia and Africa and Australasia and the high seas. And they will be in a position to bring enormous military and naval resources against this hemisphere. It is no exaggeration to say that all of us in the Americas would be living at the point of a gun loaded with explosive bullets, economic as well as military. The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis. No man can tame a tiger into a kitten by stroking it. There can be no appeasement with ruthlessness. There can be no reasoning with an incendiary bomb. We know now that a nation that can have peace with the Nazis only at the price of total surrender. The people of Europe who are defending themselves do not ask us to do their fighting. They ask us for the implements of war, the planes, the tanks, the guns, the freighters, which will enable them to fight for their liberty and our security. We have furnished the British great material support, and we will furnish far more in the future. There will be no bottlenecks in our determination to aid Great Britain. No dictator, no combination of dictators will weaken that determination by threats of how they will construe that determination. This nation is making a great effort to produce everything that is necessary in this emergency, and with all possible speed. This great effort requires great sacrifice. The nation expects our defense industries to continue operation without interruption by strikes or lockouts. It expects and insists that management and workers will reconcile their differences by voluntary or legal means to continue to produce the supplies that are so sorely needed. We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself. I believe that the Axis powers are not going to win this war. I base that belief on the latest and the best information. As President of the United States,
the latest and the best,
I call for that national effort. I call for it in the name of this nation, which we love and honor, and which we are privileged and proud to serve. I call upon our people with absolute confidence that our common cause will greatly succeed.
So let me translate that. It's your civic duty, America. Work those factories, build those guns, build those bullets, build those warplanes and tanks, because we've got to protect Britain. If Britain falls, then the whole fucking world falls. Because you cannot trust fascism. Fascism is the enemy of all of the world. It's your duty. It's your duty as American citizens to build those bombs and guns for Great Britain to protect the world against our collective enemy, fascism. That's the crux of that, okay? That is the argument. You've heard what FDR had to say about fascism. Ooh, looky boogie. What about the communist threat? What did he have to say about that? Huh? What did he have to say about the infiltration of the West by the Soviets? What did he have to say on that? Well,
it has been said that some of you are communists. That is a very unpopular term today. The Soviet Union, as a matter of practical fact, as everybody knows, that's got courage to face the fact, the practical fact known to you and known to all the world is run by a dictatorship. A dictatorship as absolute as any other dictatorship in the world. It has allied itself with another dictatorship, and it has invaded a neighbor so infinitesimally small that it could do no conceivable possible harm to the Soviet Union. As Americans, you have a right, a legal and constitutional right, to call yourselves communists, those of you who do. You have a right, peacefully and openly, to advocate certain ideals of theoretical communism. But as Americans, you have not only a right but a sacred duty to confine your advocacy of changes in law to the methods prescribed by the Constitution of the United States. And you have no American right, by act or deed of any kind, to subvert the government and the Constitution of this nation.
Pretty good coming out of a tough fight like that.
Oh,
yeah, Junior, I feel all right.
I want to know more about them, but fucking, not these people. They're far more interesting. This guy, on the other hand, somebody should have pushed this cripple down the flight of stairs in his wheelchair a long time ago, but I digress. Let me translate again. It's all right if you're a commie. You have every right to call yourself a commie. Just swearsy realsy that you won't subvert the government. Yeah. Fucking Bernie Sanders over here. We see where his allegiances are at. Let's talk about something in relation to Pearl Harbor. See, when people talk about Pearl Harbor, they just want to talk about Pearl Harbor. They just want to talk about the lead up to the attack and the cryptography and the coding and the... We'll get to that. We'll get to that. the McCullum memo and all of that. We'll get to that. We got time. We got all the time. But I want to talk about Roosevelt's third term. I might have misspoke earlier and said that this was his third term. No, this is his third term. This is his third term. 1940. I might have misspoke earlier. He's running for his third term, and I want to talk about the election of 1940 and how it relates to Pearl Harbor. Where it shows where the country's at, where it shows, because I want you, again, to see, this is what we're supposed to do on Pearl Harbor Day. We're supposed to remember Pearl Harbor. Remember Pearl Harbor. We're supposed to remember Pearl Harbor because we are supposed to remember how we got here. What is the similarities that are going on now? I will talk about that. We'll talk about that later. I have a presentation laid out, ladies and gentlemen. But for a moment, I want to talk about the election of 1940. So, FDR is running for his third term, despite what I might have said earlier. Guess what his promise is to America that he's running on? Just take a wild guess. Just take a wild guess. I want to... Oh, wait. Put it in the chat. What do you... Take a wild guess what his campaign promise in 1940 is. You ready? Let's find out.
I have said this before, but I shall say it again and again and again. Your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign war.
Got 411, got it. Oh, man. No more foreign wars. That's what FDR's running on. That's his platform for 1940. Your boys are not going to war. Well, everybody knows the winner. Nobody talks about the loser, but hey, on Moose Heaven, we respect the loser here. That's why you're here. And we're going to talk about FDR's opponent in 1940. We're going to talk about Wendell Willkie. All right. Let's talk about Wendell Willkie for a moment. I want you to bear in mind, I want you to see if you notice any similarities. I don't know. So Wendell Willkie, he is an outsider businessman, bit of a loudmouth, who's never run for any kind of political office before. He's a lifelong Democrat who all of a sudden switched over to the Republican Party. Is this ringing any bells? It's weird. So let's hear from Wendell Willkie, because everybody talks about FDR, nobody talks about Wendell Willkie. Let's find out what Wendell Willkie was talking about in 1940.
Why did Hitler strike France? Why did Hitler strike England? Why? Because they were weak economically. They had a Blum government and a Chamberlain government. You elect me President of the United States, and we'll build a domestic economy here so strong that no dictator ever shall seek to strike. And let me say in conclusion, that I, who saw service during the entire period of the last war, and I know what it is to then send men to the shambles of trenches. If you elect me President of the United States, I shall never send an American boy to fight in any European war.
So I hear what you're saying. You're saying to yourself, hey, Spirit. What? This Willkie guy, I see why I never hear about him in any history books. He sounds awesome. Sign me up. Make Willkie great again. I hate to break it to you. But he also said things like this.
The isolationists originally opposed the expansion of our Navy. They opposed the expansion of our Army. They opposed the passage of the Lease Lend Bill. They opposed the passage of the Selective Service Act. If the policy which they advocated had been adopted, the United States today would be facing a victorious Nazism in a worldwide conflict in which we might ultimately be destroyed.
So he is kind of like the other guy you're thinking about. I'm not gonna send anybody to war, but also, yeah, war. And I'm going to make an argument that I might be wrong. I might be historically wrong, and somebody who knows way more about these things than me will put me to task and show me the road. But I'm gonna make an argument right here, right now, that FDR and Wendell Willkie is where we get what we kind of officially know now as the uniparty, the mono party, the hey, we disagree about all of the social things, but the one thing that we fucking agree upon, war. I'm gonna argue that this is where it begins. Socially, economically, we all disagree, but the one thing we all agree upon, unilateral war.
It has been suggested much of late that we who do not pretend to be experts should leave the solution of our problem to military and other experts. Let's away with this nonsense. Military experts, as well as other leaders, must be constantly subject to democracy's greatest driving power, the whiplash of public opinion, arrived at from free, honest discussion. Men who exercise great power like to be free from criticism. When they get that way, that's the time to increase the criticism. I am absolutely certain that a military victory is not enough. The total defeat of the Japanese warlords and of the German Wehrmacht will not solve the problems of this tumultuous earth. We must fight our way through. We must win the peace. In order to win that peace, I think three things are absolutely necessary. First, we must plan now for peace on a global basis. Second, the world must be free politically and economically for men and nations in order for peace to exist in it. And third, the United States must play an active, constructive part in freeing the world and in keeping the peace. We Americans love freedom, but we cannot continue to have freedom unless we see to it that other men all over the world also have freedom. We must work for the ending of imperialism and for the elimination of the colonial system. I have no doubt that in this task we will be joined by millions, resident of Canada, England, South Africa, and Australia, for they now know that the freedom of men throughout this world is interdependent. They know that men all over the world are intellectually, spiritually, and physically on the march, that no longer will men in distant points submit to the domination and the rule of other peoples. They have read the Atlantic Charter. Rightly or wrongly, they are not satisfied. They say, what about a Pacific Charter? What about a World Charter?
You get the point, though. Just like Lou Ferrigno said, war is peace. And I'm gonna make the argument gonna make the argument that that's where this begins. We have to outsource our democracy to the rest of the world. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm gonna make the argument that that's where this begins in the modern era as we know it. 1940. And so I don't need to tell anybody, I don't need to spoiler anybody here to tell you that Roosevelt wins his third, he's the first and only president to win his third term as president, this fucking would-be dictator. I don't need to tell you that.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt is again elected President of the United States of America over his Republican opponent Wendell Willkie after a keenly fought and epoch-making election. Cathay Gazette brings you flashbacks to the year 1932, when in his first presidential address he uttered these prophetic words.
I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis. Broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency as great as the power that would be given to me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe.
Then in 1936, he again won the country with another sweeping victory, polling the biggest vote in American history. This kept Roosevelt as head of the state for a further 4 years. A striking feature in this momentous 1940 election was the fact that the chief plank of both candidates was aid for Britain. We may be assured that supplies of war material from America will come in ever-increasing quantities.
So, regardless of who gets elected, the outcome, regardless, is going to be more aid for Britain.
Tanks, guns, warships, planes, guaranteed for Britain under the guiding, friendly hand of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
I will, with God's help, continue to serve with the best of my ability and with the fullness of my strength.
What a piece of fucking shit, am I right? But Willkie was no better. Like, what was your alternative? Vote for Willkie? Hey, guess what? Spoiler. This is what we do on Moose Heaven. We go deeper. Willkie ended up, after the election, he completely supported FDR's foreign policy. Go figure. This is the birth of, like, Mitch McConnell right here. Like, like, I disagree with, when Mitch McConnell can talk, that is. Like, I disagree with, all of your economic policies. However, one thing that I do agree on is, war. Fucking war. I'm telling you, that's where this begins. And the United States, remember, I'm trying to go in chronological order here. The United States still hasn't officially entered into the war. And you see where these guys are already, what their foreign policy is aiming towards. And so, spoiler, after Roosevelt's elected, Willkie, who, by the way, I saw somebody saying FDR died in office. You are correct. That frail old bastard died in office. But guess what? Willkie would have died in office too, because he died he was an alcoholic. If you couldn't tell, that man was a level 12 alcoholic. And died like 3 years later. So he died around the same time as FDR. But I hate to spoil it to any of you, you hardcore make Willkie great agains. He had basically the same foreign policy as FDR. We're gonna, this is how we do. We dive a little deeper.
Germany will never conquer Russia. But if we want to finish this war off with the minimum loss of lives, both of American and other boys on our side of the fight, then we must get aggressive. We must get on the offensive. And the best way to get on the offensive is by opening a second front. A second front someplace in Europe, not necessarily across the English Channel from England. That is the only way the Russian front can really be relieved. That is the only way by which this war can be concluded.
Wow.
Carrying a private report to Mr. Roosevelt, 50 days of...
That's what Wendell Willkie had to say. Protect Russia. Long story short, protect Russia. So I hear you asking yourself, you're saying to me, but Spirit, I watch Moose Heaven, I want to know who was actually who was against all of this shit at the time? Who don't they tell me about? Oh, what's this? Oh, what's this? Why, that's a flyer for a rally. What's that say? Why, that's the America First movement. Yes, the America First movement. At the time, let me explain something to you. At the time, the America First movement is made up of a melting pot of individuals who basically oppose a wall. So you've got people on the left, people on the right, people who probably are outspoken fascists, people on the right, people on the left, maybe progressives who support Roosevelt's New Deal, but they don't support a wall. You got full-fledged fucking card-carrying communists who are anti-war. The America First movement is a diverse gumbo of ideas, but basically the center point is no war. Incidentally, John Flynn, who, if you see his name there in the middle, he ends up becoming kind of a figurehead in the Pearl Harbor was an inside job conspiracy. He writes one of the first books on the matter. So, a little bit of information there. You want to go digging? So what do you think Roosevelt's administration did with the America First movement? Well, this is the birth of where you see the what do they call it? Not the deep state, but the spy state. Where now we're spying on American citizens because they don't support a war. And the America First movement is labeled as fascist, anti-Semitic. To be fair, Charles Lindbergh makes this speech. It isn't a good look for them. He throws around the J's. Probably isn't the best look. Nevertheless, is this sounding familiar? Is this sounding familiar to you? To anybody? Hello? No war equates with fascism, I guess, or you support a dictatorship. Gee, I can't put it together. How would this relate to the modern era? Oh, but I digress. Let's go back to China. And what's one thing we know about China?
Don't trust China. China is asshole.
That's right. So, when last we left, the Imperial Japanese Army, Navy was kicking ass in Manchuria. They were taking land in China. Everything's going great. Go back to the map. So, what happens is, you see this big thing right here called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics? Well, what happens is that the Japanese have taken Manchuria. They're pushing out. They're seeing how much territory they can gobble up. And now they're running into border disputes with the Soviets. They can't afford to get into a full-on war with the fucking Soviet Union. So, let's talk about the northern and southern strategies for Japanese war. So, the northern strategy we've talked about already. Gobble up as much territory in Manchuria and China. Don't get into war with the USSR. And the Imperial Japanese Army is mostly tasked with the northern policy. Now, the southern policy, the southern strategy, the Japanese Navy mostly overtakes. And that strategy has to do with, well, let's gobble up more land in French Indochina and the Dutch East Indies. Now, as we mentioned a while ago, Japan is an island. It has to import a lot of its natural resources. Over 90% of Japan's oil is outsourced from other countries, other nations. That's a lot of oil. It also needs coal and rubber, which the Dutch East Indies just happen to be rich in. So the strategy for the Japanese Navy is, let's gobble up as much land as possible in the southern area. That will hopefully provoke the US. Now, their thought being that the US isn't. The US would never be crazy enough to enter into a two-front war. The Japanese know that the US want to get into war with Germany. They know that. But they're thinking, they're not fucking nuts enough to get into a two-front war. They don't want war in the Pacific, and the American public is mostly isolationist. They would never consent to a two-front war. So the Japanese strategy is, let's gobble up as much land and territory and resources as possible to provoke the Americans into a short war, in which the US will negotiate and treaties will be signed, and the Japanese can keep either all or some of the territory in which it's gobbled up in the north and south. Okay? Now, what happens is that, let's go back to the map for a minute. The Japanese Navy invades French Indochina. And in response to that, now the US has already been ratcheting up economic pressure on Japan. Because if you can't tell, we support China in this. So the Japanese invade French Indochina, which provokes the US and FDR to cut off all of the US supply of oil to Japan, which overnight Japan loses 80% of its oil. And then the Dutch East Indies, Britain follow suit. Overnight, Japan has lost 95% of its oil supply. Japan is in oil fucking crisis. And it needs more oil now. So, how does that happen? Well, they kind of have no choice at this point other than to enter into an alliance with Nazi Germany and Italy. And so that becomes the thing. And that's how you get this. Remember, sanctions are a form of economic war.
In view of the nature of this undeniable threat, it can be asserted properly and categorically that the United States has no right or reason to encourage talk of peace until the day shall come when there is a clear intention on the part of the aggressor nations to abandon all thought of dominating or conquering the world. The forces of the states that are leagued against all people who live in freedom are being held away from our shores. The Germans and Italians are being blocked on the other side of the Atlantic by the British and by the Greeks and by thousands of soldiers and sailors who are able to escape from subjugated countries. The Japanese are being engaged in China, in Asia, by the Chinese nation in another great defense. In the Pacific Ocean is our fleet, a gun loaded with explosive bullets, economic as well as military.
Not explosive bullets. They're the worst kind.
Frankly and definitely, there is danger ahead. Danger against which we must prepare. But we well know that we cannot escape danger or the fear of it by crawling into bed and pulling the covers over our heads.
Does anybody else see a parallel in that they're carting out this carcass of a man who is withering away on camera in front of our eyes to sell us on war? Does any of this seem familiar?
Germany has said that she was occupying Belgium to save the Belgians from the British. Would she hesitate then to say to any South American country, we are occupying you to protect you from aggression by the United States? Belgium is being used as an invasion base against Britain, now fighting for its life. And any South American country in Nazi hands would always constitute a jumping-off place for German attack on any one of the other republics of this hemisphere.
So we've got to protect Russia at all costs and stop the spread of fascism.
We think of Hawaii as an outpost of defense in the Pacific. Yet, the Azores are closer to our shores in the Atlantic
then Hawaii is on the other side.
Very interesting.
There are those who say that the Axis powers would never have any desire to attack the Western Hemisphere. This is the same dangerous form of wishful thinking which has destroyed the powers of resistance of so many conquered peoples. Let us no longer blind ourselves to the undeniable fact that the evil forces which have crushed and undermined and corrupted so many others are already within our own gates. Your government knows much about them, and every day is ferreting them out. Their secret emissaries are active in our own and neighboring countries. They seek to stir up suspicion and dissension, to cause internal strife.
So in other words, people like the America First movement, anti-war people.
They try to turn capital against labor and vice versa. They try to reawaken long slumbering racial and religious enmities, which should have no place in this country.
Is this sounding like really familiar to you guys? Because this sounds really familiar.
There are also American citizens, many of them in high places, who unwittingly, in most cases, are aiding and abetting the work of these agents. I do not charge these American citizens with being foreign agents, but I do charge them with doing exactly the kind of work that the dictators want done in the United States.
They're spreading German propaganda.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis. No man can tame a tiger into a kitten by stroking it. There can be no appeasement with ruthlessness. There can be no reasoning with an incendiary bomb.
In other words, you can't reason with a Nazi. Like, do you see what I see? This corpse, this husk of a man selling America down the river into war. This one, like this particular one, kind of grosses me out. I'm not gonna lie. When I was getting all the videos ready for this was actually one of the ones that kind of grossed me out the most, because FDR is just now newly reelected on "I will never send your boys into war. Hard R war." What does that say? Mr. Roosevelt speaks on new bases. This motherfucker's getting a hard-on about all of the new fucking guns and bombs and tanks and airplanes that we're building for Britain and building for our boys, getting ready for that war. Mind you, I'm going in alphabetical, chronological order here. We're still not at Pearl Harbor Day. This is before the war. And this son of a bitch over here is gleefully, well, you'll see.
The United States President in this picture is dedicating a national park in Tennessee. But even way down there, the subject they all want to hear about is the war.
We have come to realize that the greatest attack that has ever been launched against freedom of the individual is nearer the Americas than ever before. To meet that attack, we must prepare beforehand, for the simple reason that preparing later may and probably would be too late. We must prepare in 1,000 ways. Men are not enough. They must have arms. They must learn how to use those arms. They must have skilled leaders who in turn must be trained. New bases must be established, and I think will be established, to enable our fleets to defend our shores.
So I know that I just sold you on a re-election of keeping your boys out of war, but it's imperative to stop the fascist movement, that we build more tanks and more bases and more guns and more ammunition. It's not sufficient that we have men to fight the war. They must be trained to use the guns that we are building to fight the war. Like, your grade school version of history will tell you that we entered the war after December 7th, 1941. But this motherfucker right here, before Pearl Harbor, is selling everybody on war. I know that I just sold you on keeping out of the war, but now I'm telling you it's imperative that now that I have 4 more years in the White House, I'm telling you that it's imperative that we get into war. We train our men for the upcoming war, because Roosevelt's expecting that Germany launch the first strike. He's expecting the Germans to launch the first strike and enter us into war. However, it's not coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
These are the bases referred to, leased by Britain to the United States. Newfoundland, dominant point in the control of the North Atlantic. Bermuda, a base offshore from Virginia. The islands don't become American. They simply have American tenants who will guard the interests of Britain with their own. And so on, with the Bahamas, Jamaica, Antigua, the West Indies will share the protection of Britain and America. It is the foundation of a new order of world security, and Britain has received 50 destroyers. 50 destroyers today, worth 100 next year.
World order. Put a pin in that. Put a pin in that, because I have a clip. If you're into that sort of thing, I have a clip for you. I have a clip for you, and it's coming. It's forthcoming. So, here it is. So, Roosevelt's expecting that Germany launch the first strike in the war, and that will bring America into the war. However, it's not happening. And then, in the spring, some carriers, some U.S. transports are attacked by a German U-boat. And Roosevelt is happy as a pig in shit because a shooting war has begun with Germany. Let's watch how happy this motherfucker is that the Germans have fired the first shot in the war.
History has recorded who fired the first shot. In the long run, however, all that will matter is who fired the last shot. Our American merchant ships must be free to carry our American goods into the harbors of our friends. And our American merchant ships must be protected by our American Navy. I think that it can be said that it can never be doubted that the goods will be delivered by this nation, whose Navy believes in the tradition of damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead.
In other words, war. But what if I were to tell you? What if I were to tell you that that speech there isn't the full speech, it's edited down? What if I were to tell you they cut something out of that speech? And you know how we do on Moose Heaven, we want to dive deeper. What did they cut out of that speech? What did they edit out? Because there's an edit there. They edited something out. Let's find out. Let's listen to the entire speech. See if you pick up on any buzzwords.
Many American-owned ships have been sunk on the high seas. One American destroyer was attacked on September 4th. Another destroyer was attacked and hit on October 17th. 11 brave and loyal men of our Navy were killed by the Nazis. We have wished to avoid shooting, but the shooting has started, and history has recorded who fired the first shot. In the long run, however, all that will matter is who fired the last shot.
Okay, we heard that part.
Hitler has often protested that his plans for conquest do not extend across the Atlantic Ocean, but his submarines and raiders prove otherwise. And so does the entire design of his new world order. For example...
His what? His what? His new world order?
Design of his new world order. For example, I have in my possession a secret map made in Germany by Hitler's government, by the planners of the New World Order. It is a map of South America and a part of Central America as Hitler proposes to reorganize it. Today in this area, there are 14 separate countries. But the geographical experts in Berlin have ruthlessly obliterated all existing boundary lines. They have divided South America into 5 vassal states, bringing the whole continent under their domination. And they have also so arranged it that the territory of one of these new puppet states includes the Republic of Panama and our great lifeline, the Panama Canal. That is his plan. It will never go into effect.
Well, we have to stop the new world order. Hitler has a new world order. We have to stop it. We have to stop his new world order so that we can have our new world order. I should have put in the clip of Bush. New world order. But let's talk about this guy for a moment. So, this is Rear Admiral Arthur McCullum. He's born in Japan. And in November 1940, he writes a memo to his boss, the Director of Naval Intelligence. Now, see, McCollum, being born in Japan, feels that he knows the Japanese psychology and feels like he knows the best way to provoke Japan into a war. So he issues a memorandum to the Director of Naval Intelligence, which is now known as the McCollum Memo. And in it, he lays out an 8-step program for provoking Japan into war. Now, being that this is a memo to the Director of Naval Intelligence, this for sure would have crossed Roosevelt's desk. Now, the evidence lies in the fact that all 8 steps end up becoming implemented. Also, let's take a look at that part that's underlined. So he recommends his 8 steps. Let's see what they are. Make an agreement with Britain for the use of British bases in the Pacific, particularly Singapore. Make arrangement with Holland for the use of base facilities and acquisition of supplies in the Dutch East Indies. Give all possible aid to the Chinese government. Don't want to forget that. Send a division of long-range heavy cruisers to the Orient, Philippines, and Singapore. Send 2 divisions of submarines to the Orient. Can't say that. That's racist. Keep the main strength of the U.S. fleet now in the Pacific in the vicinity of the Hawaiian Islands. Insist the Dutch refuse to grant Japanese demand for undue economic concessions, particularly oil. Completely embargo all U.S. trade with Japan in collaboration with similar embargo imposed with the British Empire. Underline, if by these means Japan could be led into commit an overt act of war, so much the better. All of these 8 steps become implemented, including moving all of the U.S. Pacific Fleet to Pearl Harbor. Admiral James Richardson, who is in charge of the base at the time, complains to Roosevelt, "Hey, this makes no sense. Why would you anchor all of the entire Pacific Fleet in one place?" We are practically begging for an attack. What do you think FDR's response was? You know by now that FDR was a piece of shit, so FDR heard Admiral Richardson's concerns and promptly fired him. He replaced him with Admiral Husband Kimmel, and assured Admiral Kimmel that there was nothing to worry about, that the base was in no imminent threat. Nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, let's talk about the Lend-Lease Act. So remember, we're already supplying the Chinese and the British on the down low and the Soviets with munitions. Now we're just doing it over the table with the Lend-Lease Act.
More than half a year, the Lend-Lease Act has been in force, and almost since the beginning of the war, we've heard of American factories working for Britain. We've followed with breathless anxiety the dangerous passage of these vital goods across the Atlantic. But we haven't seen very much evidence with our own eyes of the stuff in Britain. In the pictures that follow, you will see just a small part of that war material made in United States factories. You will see how the stream of modern weapons is swelling to a flood. You will see an endless chain of steel fighting equipment flowing in to equip a new British offensive machine. It's a pity these pictures can't be shown in Germany and to the countries now occupied and oppressed. The effect would be revolutionary.
Yes, because we know about all of the oppression in fascist Germany, not in free Soviet Russia. No.
We have to thank one man. At the start of the war, America was 3,000 miles away from our battlefields. Her policy since the last Great War had been to keep her nose out of European affairs, and you couldn't honestly blame her. But America's president had the genius that foresaw Hitler's design for world conquest with unmistakable clarity. He knew that if Britain went down, America would probably go down too. But he had the job of selling that conviction to millions of Americans who didn't want to believe it. What you see now is the evidence of how well he succeeded. Yes, we in Britain have good cause to say, thanks, Mr. Roosevelt.
Fuck you, you fucking limeys. Thank you for the weapons, Mr. Roosevelt. And thank you, the unknowing American populace, for supplying us with guns and ammunition in our fight against Hitler. Oh, this has been going on a long time. And if you're seeing parallels, you should be. Let's talk about the codes. I've seen people talking about that. Let's get to that. This is a well-established fact at this point, and you can look into other people who have studied it far much more than I have. There was a program called Magic to decrypt the Japanese codes. Now, as I understand it, they pretty much had the Japanese diplomatic codes, which were codenamed Purple. They pretty much had the purple codes decoded. They did not, however, have the full decoding of the Japanese Navy movements. Okay? Now, let's get into some spy shit, because we're gonna get into like some James Bond shit later on in a minute here. But let's get into the oogie boogie spooky badookie stuff. So, the US and Britain knew that the Japanese had a code that they were going to use. They knew that they were hiding codes in weather reports. Think about this. This is actually pretty fucking interesting. They would broadcast weather reports, and within the weather reports, depending on when they said, oh, rain's coming from this direction, that would mean, codes for different things. Fascinating. I like that kind of stuff. I don't know about you. And so, by this point, the British and the US were already aware that there was a Japanese diplomatic code that they were to look out for, that they were hiding diplomatic codes within the weather reports, and there was a specific code to the point where the naval intelligence were keeping cards on their desk to remind themselves to look out for the code. Higashi no Kazeyame, east wind rain, which signified a diplomatic split and therefore war. So, they're already listening to Japanese diplomatic codes. They've already broken the code. They already know what to look out for, and they know that east wind rain means war. And then on December 4th, Higashi no Kazeyame was broadcast and picked up by Washington intelligence. Go figure. Go figure. So let's learn a little bit more about the code breaking from a guy who knows a thing or two about it. Are you ready?
In November 1941, U.S. Army intelligence had intercepted and decoded a message from Tokyo to its embassies abroad, telling them that if the words "East, Wind, Rain" were heard on the Japanese overseas radio service, they would indicate an impending clash with the United States. On December the 4th, as Yamamoto's fleet closed on its target, Japanese radio broadcast the code phrase in its weather forecasts. The message was intercepted by senior radio operator Ralph Biggs at the U.S. Navy Intercept Station at Cheltenham in Maryland. At once, it was passed on to both Navy and Army intelligence and the White House. Because only the Navy knew of Yamamoto's messages to his fleet, no one drew the correct conclusions. Soon after Pearl Harbor, the cover-up would begin. All copies of the message would be removed from official files and destroyed. Pressure would be put on Navy personnel to deny that the Japanese radio broadcasts had ever been monitored.
November 26, 1941. You're asking yourself, did they have any foreknowledge? Did they know that this was coming? Battle Order Number 1, November 26, 1941. The USS Enterprise is now operating under war conditions. So, shortly before the attack, they move the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise targets the aircraft carriers with their valuable aircraft fleets to Wake Island, valuable targets that could have defended the base. Nevertheless, the USS Enterprise is positioned away from Pearl Harbor, where it could have been of strategic defense. Were people aware? Were like the general public aware that there could have been an imminent attack by the Japanese? The Honolulu Advisor: Japanese may strike over the weekend. November 30th, 1941. Honolulu Tribune Herald: Japan may strike over the weekend. Telling me that they didn't know, they didn't have some inkling. I think otherwise. Let's hear from someone else. I think this is the clip. Robert Stinnett. I actually, he wrote the definitive book. If you want to look into this stuff, Day of Deceit. I hold it in my hand as we speak, right here on my desk. Day of Deceit: The Truth About FDR and Pearl Harbor by Robert Stinnett. He wrote kind of the definitive book about it. Let's hear from him. I'm gonna take another pee break.
While researching his book, Stinnett uncovered a second document drafted by Leitweiler and received by his superiors in Washington. In it, Stinnett says Leitweiler indicates that his Corregidor team is reading current traffic and has broken the Japanese naval code.
Commander Leitweiler says that he was current in intercepting, decoding, and translating the messages as of November 16, 1941. What more do you need?
Stinnett also maintains that the enormous Japanese fleet, led by Vice Admiral Nagumo, broke radio silence as they pushed toward Pearl Harbor, allowing U.S. interceptors to track the course of the attacking fleet.
The actual evidence that Stinnett has uncovered that not only did Nagumo break radio silence, but the U.S. naval listening posts were listening to Nagumo's transmissions and therefore plotting Nagumo's voyage across the Pacific towards Pearl Harbor only adds credence to the explanation that FDR suppressed here yet another piece of vital intelligence, deliberately kept the commanders at Pearl Harbor in the dark.
Late November 1941, Japanese warships churned toward Hawaii. As they do, some believe that President Franklin D. Roosevelt is setting up Pearl Harbor for disaster.
Gee, you think?
Author Robert Stinnett has proof, he says, that the Japanese fleet broke radio silence during their trek southeastward. If so, the U.S. Navy would have been well aware of the Japanese approach.
The radio silence doctrine is another of the major Pearl Harbor hoax. It holds that beginning on November 25th Hawaii time, the Japanese Navy went on radio silence.
To date, most historians have accepted that the Japanese maintained strict radio silence as they neared Hawaii. Stinnett agrees that the Japanese Navy ordered radio silence, but he says a proviso in the order allowed individual Japanese commanders to ignore it.
The Japanese admirals, for some strange reason, they threw that order to the wind and engaged in extensive radio communications with one another as they were approaching Pearl Harbor.
One American tracking those communications, Stinnett says, was Leslie Grogan, a radio operator on a cruise ship bound for Honolulu.
The SS Lurleen, which is a passenger liner, was en route from San Francisco to Hawaii. They also had a radio direction finder aboard, and the radio operators were listening to the Japanese warships. So they picked up the messages, these extensive military naval communications. And they picked them up from about November 30th to about December the 5th.
Days after the Pearl Harbor attack, U.S. Naval Intelligence confiscated the original log from the Lurleen, including Grogan's notes. The log was eventually stored away in a federal record center outside San Francisco. It then somehow disappeared. All that now remains is an undated, unsigned withdrawal slip. But Grogan apparently reconstructed his notes the same day his log was taken. 50 years later, Robert Stinnett hunted them down. Grogan writes that the Japanese radio transmission boldly blasts away. The signals were good enough to get good DF, radio direction finder bearings. And the main body of the signals came from north and west of Honolulu. Stinnett maintains that even U.S. naval intelligence in Pearl Harbor picked up the radio transmissions of the Japanese fleet. He points to a communications intelligence summary from the Navy's listening post at Pearl. The document was written November 25th, 1941, the same day the Japanese attack fleet left for Hawaii. It reports that the Commander-in-Chief of Japan's First Air Fleet, Vice Admiral Nagumo, held extensive communications with his Central Pacific commander. Stinnett asserts that the ominous radio traffic was picked up by Allied personnel throughout the Pacific Rim.
You have the stations at Seattle, you have the stations in Eureka and San Francisco picking up the same messages. This is not one or two, this is scores of people reporting hearing these messages, and it was put in the naval records. It's documented.
In fact, a meeting does take place at the White House after, Stinnett says, stations on the West Coast intercepted a flurry of Japanese communications. In attendance, President Roosevelt, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Harold Stark, and Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall.
On November 27th, President Roosevelt told General Marshall to send a message to the Hawaiian and Philippine commanders, don't interfere with Japan's overt act of war. The United States desires that Japan commit the first overt act.
The Navy commander at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Husband Kimmel, receives this message at his headquarters.
In other words, let the Japanese submarines enter Pearl Harbor and try to sink our ships.
There's no argument about what FDR meant. He meant that the U.S. naval plan to defend Pearl Harbor should not and cannot be executed. Admiral Stark and FDR, it seems, obviously wanted the Japanese to surprise and utterly destroy Pearl Harbor.
Do you think?
At 7:55 a.m. on December 7th, after a 3,500-mile rush across the North Pacific, a huge Japanese flotilla of nearly 36 ships delivers its deadly cargo of bombers and fighter planes.
So right up until the moment, right up until the very moment of the attack, they have secret information telling them this is coming. They're breaking radio silence. But I want to talk about something more interesting. And you know what? Hold on. Fuck this. To talk about this guy, I need the right music. Hit it. Alright. Maybe don't hit it. Alright, maybe now hit it. The name is Popov. Dushko Popov. He's born to a Lithuanian banking family, very wealthy. And he's recruited into the Abwehr, the German intelligence network. Only Dushko has no allegiance to the Nazis. So, when the Abwehr sends Dushko off to Britain to be a double agent to spy on the British, he immediately turns to his British handlers and rats out the Germans. And there he becomes a double, nay, triple agent. And from there he's given his code name Tricycle, which either refers to his station as a triple agent or his penchant for threesomes, because you see, Dushko here loved to play Playboy. His girlfriend was French actress Simone. And check this out. So, Dushko is given a job by his Abwehr handlers in Germany. He's in Portugal. And he's living it up at this casino, gambling, womanizing, having fucking threesomes. He's giving British disinformation to the Germans. And it's at this base of operations, this casino in Portugal, that Dushko runs into a British naval intelligence agent named Ian Fleming. Now, you'll see where this is going, right? Ian Fleming uses Dushko. He's so impressed by him that he uses Dushko as the inspiration for James fucking Bond. So, Dushko Popov, Tricycle, James fucking Bond, the real 007, working on the sly for MI6 or 7 or 8 or 9. And it's at this casino that's his base of operations in Portugal that he gets information from his Abwehr handlers. Or you see, in November of 1940, the British conducted an air raid against the Italian Navy in the Battle of Taranto. Not Canada, Taranto, Italy. Now, in this raid, the British used Fairey Swordfish biplane torpedo bombers to bomb the Italian fleet, and they were very successful. Now, why does this matter? What does this have to do with Pearl Harbor? Well, you see, Popov learns that observing the British raid on the Italians, German emissaries brought Japanese diplomats to observe the raid. Okay? Are you seeing where this is going? And now, the Abwehr German handlers want Popov to establish a U.S. base of operations to bring them intelligence about United States naval information. Now, let's get really super spooky, dooky, James Bondy. You know what that is? You know what this is? That's a microdot. Have you ever heard of a microdot before? You can store an entire page worth of information. It's like microfiche, if you've seen those. And you can take a little tiny photograph just on the tip of your finger and blow it up and have an entire photograph of a document, anything. And you can hide these microdots under a stamp or in a bag of Kool-Aid. All kinds of fucking fun Cold War era spy shit. Microdots. Now, Popov's Abwehr German handlers have a questionnaire for him to fill out when he's in the United States that they have put onto microdots. And in this questionnaire are such questions as, what are the naval defenses around Pearl Harbor? Does it have any torpedo nets? What's the shallowness of the water there? Are you putting two and two together? Because fucking Dushko Popov is. He sees where this is going. You've got Japanese diplomats getting intelligence from German intelligence on British bombings of Italian naval fleets using torpedoes, testing the waters in Pearl Harbor. Do you see where this is going? Yeah. Like Otis says, you smell what he's stepping in? So Dushko Popov takes this information to J. Edgar Hoover. This guy. And Popov tries to warn the United States, hey, I've got these German fellas asking a lot of questions about Pearl Harbor and, you know, like whether or not it's got torpedo nets and the depth of the water there. And so he hands over the microdots to Hoover. Now Hoover, he can't fucking stand Dushko Popov. He hates him. First of all, Hoover hates Hoover hates everybody. Hoover hates Jews. He hates blacks, he hates Catholics. He hates double agents. He hates everybody. And he hates Dushko Popov because of his wild, womanizing, tricycle threesome having ways. This moral arbiter of justice, J. Edgar Hoover, who, used to leave work and come to work every morning, with Clyde Tolson. I'll let you put that one together. Leaves for work, comes to work every day with the same guy. You know what? I'm just gonna leave this up for a minute, and I'll let you read that one. You learn all kinds of stuff on Moose Heaven. You have time to read that? Like I said, you learn all kinds of fun facts on here. So Hoover can't stand Popov. He disregards him. He writes him off. He says, I bet you just want to sell us out to your German friends. And I mean, to his credit, Hoover says, fuck no, you can't establish a German intelligence spy ring in the United States. Give him that. Fair point. Nevertheless, Dushko Popov, everybody. He tried to warn the United States. J. Edgar Hoover passes along the information to FDR. However, he says, this is the type of information that, the German intelligence might be gathering about the United States. However, he doesn't mention anything about Pearl Harbor. Sus. So if anybody knew something and covered it up, it was J. Edgar fucking Hoover, this guy. But Dushko Popov, he goes on, there's other little cool facts about him. He's involved in giving disinformation to the Germans about D-Day. But we're here to talk about Pearl Harbor. So we got Dushko Popov trying to warn the United States. We've got codes being broken. We've got radio silence being broken, leading right up to the attack. I think you know what happens. I think you know what happens next.
first time we're able to show official Japanese news films of their treacherous attack on Pearl Harbor. Propaganda designed to whip up the public victory spirit. Hawaii-bound, officers aboard a carrier tune in to an American radio program supposed to show the decadence of the Western powers.
Rocky, but he's done that way all evening. Good morning, George. How's the old delay? Hi, pal. What's a couple of drinks?
These scenes must have been staged weeks before the attack. Now the final briefing for the men who were to strike without warning at America's fleet. 0 hour for the air crews trained in their fatal mission for many months. These takeoffs were probably filmed during early maneuvers, the fake films made up and ready for release in Japan immediately after the attack had taken place.
Fake news, everybody.
Coming in over Pearl Harbor, radios tuned in to a typical American program, obviously faked in a studio. Propaganda scenes of the attack itself, filmed on a miniature studio set at Pearl Harbor with carefully posed shots of the heroes of the hour.
I'll say it's propaganda, all right.
The battleship model shouldn't have fooled anybody. Warlords of Japan boasted that they'd knocked out the American fleet, which was very nearly the truth, although they themselves didn't believe it. More battle pictures with dive bombers at work on oil tanks and road transport, but here's a puzzle. How could the aerial cameraman film this blast from the ground?
How could they do that? He filmed
Now
from the
he's
grassy
up in the air again
knoll.
for the dive bombing of an airfield. So began the first frantic war cries of a people who'd yet to learn the truth of the proverb, he who laughs last.
Laugh it up, you goddamn chap. Oh my god. So, if you ever still have any friends who think that this smug fucking crippled banker asshole who should have by all rights been pushed down the stairs in his wheelchair a long time ago, if you have any friends, if you have any Bernie fucking Sanders friends who think that this smug-faced fucking asshole was the greatest president that we ever had, just remind them. Look, and I'm all disclaimer. I'm all for a good racial joke. Open minds welcome here. However, it's the dehumanizing nature of things that start to get a little weird, right? Am I right? We can all agree on that, right? Just remind your friends who say that FDR was the greatest fucking president. This is the progressive era right here. This is the result of the progressives right here, right fucking here. Show them that. They probably voted for FDR right there. Oh, but the progressive era was so progressive. The New Deal. Just remind them. Can't pop a Jap with scrap. Now, I would have said you can't clap a Jap with scrap, but maybe that's, maybe that's me just being a little, Gen Z. But you remind that motherfucker that this is the progressive era right here. This is FDR's legacy right here. Go ahead, take a day off. Yeah. Open trap, make a happy Jap. Just keep reminding him. This one's kind of fucking awesome. Not gonna lie. I would definitely buy that comic book. I'm not gonna lie. Keep talking. I'm all ears. I got all night for this shit. You just remind your Bernie Sanders, Social Democrat, liberal friends. This is their guy. Gap trap. So that mixture of that, the Jap trap, and this. Okay, let's make our equation. Casual, dehumanizing racism plus completely unforeseen attack. How could we ever have seen this coming? Equals this. Wah. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 hours ago, if you've been watching, you heard this son of a bitch on screen say, I will never send your boys to war. And here he is, sending your boys to war. That's how we got here. So remember Pearl Harbor, December 7th, a day which will live in infamy. You've all heard that, but I want you to hear it differently. Not the way you read it in your goddamn middle school textbooks, but as a warning. Warning. This is how we got here. This little speech, this speech that says gone down in infamy should scare the living shit out of you if you've been listening. If you've been listening over the last 2 hours, if you've seen how we've gotten to this point, this day which we're living in infamy, this should scare the shit out of you. This is how you get totalitarian war, and that's what you should remember on December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day. Obviously remember that it happened. Remember the people who lost their lives. Obviously remember that. But remember, like a secular conspiracy Christmas every year, that this is how we got here. Okay? And this speech should send shivers down your spine.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us.
Hey, do you remember, real quick, remember Star Wars? Remember Attack of the Clones? Well, this is how American isolationism dies. With thunderous applause. Just wanted to stick that in there.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph. So help us God.
And that's how it starts, everybody. Our entry into World War II. That's how we get a declaration of war. This crippled motherfucker, this Palpatine fucking motherfucker. Unbelievable. That's why we study history, everybody, because those who fail to study history are bound to what's the quote? What's the quote? Bound to repeat it? Because some people were paying attention.
Nations, democracies don't go to war easily, and they usually debate and argue before they do. Sometimes they have to be bombed into going to war. In fact, that's what happened in World War II. All of Europe had been conquered. You had to, America was actually bombed in Pearl Harbor, and that was a pivotal event that opened the eyes of Americans. And once their eyes were opened, they gathered the power that is available in this great free nation, and the result was preordained. I think in a similar way, the bombing of September 11th opened the eyes of Americans to see the great conflict and the great danger that faces us. And once opened, then the overpowering will of the majority of the people of the United States, of the steamroller, is inexorably moving to decide this battle.
I want to make clear Israel's position regarding a ceasefire. Just as the United States would not agree to a ceasefire after the bombing of Pearl Harbor or after the terrorist attack of 9/11, Israel will not agree to a cessation of hostilities with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas. to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. This is a time for war, a war for our common future. Today we draw a line between the forces of civilization and the forces of barbarism. It is a time for everyone to decide where they stand.
So I hear you saying, but Spirit, Pearl Harbor was 80-2 years ago. It has no relevance to me right now in 2023. Oh no! This is why we're gathered here. Have a fireside chat about Pearl Harbor. Because it matters. This matters because it is fundamental. This is how we got into war. And if you don't think that they don't play the same script over and over, well then clearly you need to watch more Moose Heaven. Buy me a coffee.com/mooseheaven. While I have this cozy fire up and we're talking to each other, let me remind you, your donations go towards not war, but making this stream possible. And if you enjoy this content and want to see more of it, and you don't want to hear me talk in that goddamn North Atlantic accent anymore, then buy me a coffee.com/mooseheaven. I got a lot of fun stuff in the pipeline, some JFK stuff. I hope you guys enjoy that. I think you guys will, but I don't want to get away from war because... So what happened? We all know what happened. Pearl Harbor got bombed. We went to war. But what happened after that? Well, those that are decrepit from the Mesozoic, Plesiozoic era, like myself, will remember. You remember the 9/11 commissions? Remember those? Well, they had a similar thing with Pearl Harbor. And they found that the United States had information up to the very moment of the attack that could have led to them avoiding such a catastrophic failure of intelligence. But they threw Admiral Kimmel under the bus and blamed it all on him, even though to this day people argue whether or not Kimmel actually knew, how much he knew, whether he was kept in the dark or not. Nevertheless, Kimmel was the scapegoat during the hearings. They threw that motherfucker under the bus.
Investigating Committee hears the testimony of Admiral Kimmel, who was Navy head at Pearl Harbor at the time of the Jap sneak attack. The Admiral, who along with General Short was removed from his command, has this to say.
We needed one thing, which our own resources could not make available to us. That vital need was the information available in Washington from the intercepted dispatches, which told when and where Japan would probably strike. I did not get this information. Another course of action then remained. That was to issue an order which would have directed dispositions of the fleet to guard against an attack in Hawaii. The message of June 17, 1940. Be on the alert against hostile overseas raid for such an order. It would have had the same effect in December of 1941 as it had in June of 1940. Such an order was not given. It is my conviction that action by the Navy Department at any one of these significant dates in furnishing me the information from the intercepted messages would have altered the events of December 7, 1941.
Oh, Uno, that sounds fun. So they threw Admiral Kimmel under the bus, blamed it all on him. He swears that he didn't have the information. Now, if you are the conspiracy-minded, you've probably heard much of this already before, but I want to point out to you, because you know, those of you who know, you know. Where does this go? Why is this important? Why is this important 80 dickety 2 years later? Why? Why? Because it doesn't just lead us into war. It leads to the birth of the intelligence state. Spying on American citizens who oppose war. And it leads to the birth of the OSS. The precursor to the CIA. You wouldn't have the OSS if you didn't have Pearl Harbor. The bungling of intelligence and the miscommunication of information that could have prevented the attack go on to birth the OSS. That's the justification for it. We need our own agency, the United Agency of Intelligence for the war. And that's how you get the CIA. So all of this should be very relevant to you. This isn't just 80 dickety 2 years ago and we had an onion on our belt because it was the style at the time. This should all be fucking relevant to you if you've been paying attention over the last 2 hours. If you've heard that son of a bitch cripple Roosevelt talk about how we have to stop the onslaught of fascism and supply our good friends with munitions and more guns and more bombs and more tanks. It's imperative. We have to stop the whole machine and get those fucking guns to our friends. If you hear that, if you've been paying attention, this should all scare you. Frankly, this should scare you. Because as curators of history, that's our job. It's our job is to remember these things. I remember it, so you don't have to. Because remember Pearl Harbor, it means something different than you think it means. All of this should be fucking crazy relevant to you right now.
We're going to take you now over to the White House. President Biden is delivering remarks urging Congress to pass his national security supplemental request, which includes funding for Ukraine. Let's listen.
And quite frankly, of our partners as well. This cannot wait. Congress needs to pass supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break for the holiday resources. As simple as that. Frankly, I think it's stunning that we've gotten to this point in the first place. While Republicans in Congress are willing to give Putin the greatest gift he could hope for and abandon our global leadership, not just in Ukraine, but beyond that. We've all seen the brutality that Putin has inflicted on Ukraine, invading another country, trying to subjugate his neighbors to his iron rule, committing atrocities against Ukrainian civilians, trying to plunge them into the cold and darkness of winter by bombing their electrical grid so they don't have any heat during the winter, or electricity for that matter, kidnapping thousands of Ukrainian children from their parents and families and keeping them in Russia. Russian forces are committing war crimes. It's as simple as that. It's stunning.
It's stunning. It's stunning. They're committing war crimes.
Who's prepared to walk away from holding Putin accountable for this behavior? Who among us is really prepared to do that? You know, for the better part of 2 years, the brave people of Ukraine have denied Russia a victory on the battlefield.
Brave people.
They've defeated Vladimir Putin's ambition to dominate Ukraine. And the people of the United States can and should take pride. They should take pride that we've enabled Ukraine's success thanks to the steady supply of weapons and ammunition. We've provided them together with our partners and our allies. I just did a meeting with the G7.
Are you hearing this? Are you hearing this? Are you hearing this after just hearing what we just heard? Unfucking believable! Unfucking believable! 82 years ago, and you say, oh, Pearl Harbor's not relevant. Who fucking cares? If you've been watching, if you've been paying attention to my Ken Burns presentation, I mean, Moose Heaven's kind of like a manic Tom Waits meets Ken Burns sort of presentation, but I digress. If you've been watching this, it's fucking canny. It's your duty. It's your duty as an American citizen to provide arms and ammunition to the brave Ukrainian resistance fighters who are fighting against the tyranny of the dictatorship of Vladimir Putin. Like, just, it's like, you remember Mad Libs? Do you remember Mad Libs? This is geopolitical Mad Libs. This is just geopolitical Mad Libs of fill in dictator, fill in country, fill in why we need to supply arms and ammunition to our friends in their brave struggle against fascism and dictatorship. Do you see how this is all relevant to the modern era? I'm not going off the beaten path by talking about this. No, this is Conspiracy Christmas. This is why we're here. Remember Pearl Harbor. It means something. I know I keep repeating that, but I'm repeating it for a reason, because you do need to remember Pearl Harbor. Not the remember Pearl Harbor that you see every year on the mainstream media of, oh, how sad. You need to remember that part too. But this fucking corpse, this corpse of a president, this corpse of a fucking president. He isn't much different than the other guy. He isn't much different than the other guy we watched. How is this any different? How is this any different than this smug asshole? It's very relevant. It's the birth of the American Uniparty, where we oppose all of the social and economic issues, but the one thing that we are unilaterally in agreement upon is war. It's the birth of the surveillance and the intelligence state. Pearl Harbor means a lot. It means a lot more than just, hey, remember that some people died and remember that the Japanese. Oh, it means a lot. Very relevant. It's very relevant to today. And so, in that regard, in that respect, I hope you remember Pearl Harbor and what led us from point A to point B and how we got here. And if there's one thing that I can impress upon you, it's this.
Don't trust China. China is asshole.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, guys, that's been our fireside chat for the evening. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm in no rush to get out of here. So buymeacoffee.com/mooseheaven. Let me tell you what's coming down the pipe. I've been digging a lot into JFK stuff because you guys seem to really enjoy that. So next time, I think I'll be back in about 2 weeks from now. I want to try and do more of these and more consistently. Next time, we'll be back in about 2 weeks with a Lee Harvey Oswald Christmas. That's right. If you saw the last stream, which I hope you did, if not, you probably should watch it, because we're gonna pick up exactly where we left off. Who shot JD Tippit? That's what we came into the last stream. Hey, for those of you sticking around, for you hardcore Moose Heaveners, I know you watched the last stream. Well, the last stream we broke down the JD Tippit murder. How that leads to Lee Harvey Oswald, how that connects to, you see, it's the linchpin of the Warren Commission's suspect of guilt upon Lee Harvey Oswald for shooting Kennedy. It rests upon the JD Tippit murder. Like, I cannot stress that enough for those of you autistic enough to go down this JFK rabbit hole as I have done. So, next time on Moose Heaven, in about 2 weeks, we'll do a Lee Harvey Oswald Christmas, where we look at the suspects. Because last time we broke down the JD Tippit murder. We looked at how the witnesses are extremely inconsistent. It leaves us with more questions than answers, right? And at the end of last presentation, we were left to ask ourselves, was Lee Harvey Oswald the person who pulled the trigger on JD Tippit? Because that's where the Warren Commission's prosecution of Lee Harvey Oswald, the linchpin in which it rests upon is whether or not he shot Officer JD Tippit. Not Kennedy, it's whether or not he shot JD Tippit. That's their linchpin. Like, I cannot stress that enough, right? For those of you who, with eyes to see and ears to hear, And so we're going to go further down that rabbit hole because last time we left off, we were left with more questions than answers. And we weren't really any further in answering the most important question: who shot, not Kennedy, who shot J.D. Tippit? Who shot J.D. Tippit? Well, I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to spoil things because oh boy. I can't begin to tell you the rabbit hole I've fallen into with JFK. I took it upon myself as maybe a challenge when people said, Spirit, that was 60 years ago. There's nothing more that you're going to find out about that. Yeah, I took that as a little bit of a challenge, and it's led me down a rabbit hole where I have to question my own reality, and maybe that's the point. But I digress. I don't want to get ahead of myself and spoil what's ahead. It's going to take more than one stream to sort this out. The JFK thing is... oh boy. It's become a little bit of an obsession for me, not gonna lie. Because I feel like I'm on the edge. I really feel like I'm on the edge sometimes. Of names and places and people and things. People no one ever talks about. Like, sometimes I really feel like I'm this close to knowing who pulled the trigger. And I'm gonna name names.
Bum, bum, bum.
So you're gonna have to keep watching if you want to hear more about that. Because I'm gonna tell you JFK stuff that you've probably never heard before. And we'll do a Lee Harvey Oswald Christmas. And we'll figure out. We'll name names. What if I told you? What if I told you? I'm not gonna leave you hanging like last time. Next time on Moose Heaven, let's talk about who I think. I don't want to say. I don't want to accuse them of shooting J.D. Tippit. Not yet. But I will at least put forward a suspect. And it's not Lee Harvey Oswald. And if you think that this is just gonna be some Magic Bullet, Dealey Plaza, grassy knoll, I've heard this all before. No. Because I've heard all that before, and I've never heard some of this before. So, I hope you tune in for that. I hope you stay tuned. I hope you're subscribed. All the things. I hope you have a happy Hanukkah. Remember Pearl Harbor. And look, I'll leave you with this. If there's two things we've learned tonight, two things. Hold on. I need to cut the music. There's two things we've learned tonight. Okay? It's this. Number one, don't trust China. China is asshole. And number two, in the pursuit of truth, don't trust anybody. Have a good night, everybody. Remember Pearl Harbor.
Trust China, China is asshole. Don't trust China, China is asshole. Don't trust China, asshole, 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 asshole. Don't trust China, China is asshole. Don't trust China, China is asshole. Don't trust China, asshole, 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 asshole. Trust China, asshole. Trust China. China. Asshole. Don't trust China.